deserve the platform of being in the House of Commons, given the contribution he has made to British politics in the last 5 years, forcing the issue of immigration onto the political agenda, forcing David Cameron to promise an in-out referendum, although just how rigged or straight that would be is a very live issue.
We might come on to that a bit later,
at the moment.
But isn't the problem with Nigel that he is a party leader, and yet he's already admitted that he wouldn't be a very good Prime Minister, and therefore that might put a lot of people off voting for him in South Thanet?
Well, I think if you're asked that question, would you be a good Prime Minister, you either say, yes, I would, and sound boastful, or, you answer it that that's not the role that Nigel is envisaging for himself.
Would you be a good Chancellor?
Would I be a good Chancellor? Well, I at least have an economics degree, unlike either the Chancellor, the Shadow Chancellor, or the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And given that the Labour lot put $500 billion on the national debt in round figures, and that Osborne and Alexander have done the same, I don't think I'd do any worse than that.
I think the serious side of this is that even though Nigel's been around for a long time, he is basically UKIP. People look at him and they think he's UKIP. He's already said if he doesn't win, he will resign. Wouldn't that be the end of UKIP? Because it's quite difficult to imagine who might take over.
Well, I think we have a broad base of emerging talented people. I think of Suzanne Evans. A caller mentioned Stephen Wolfe already. Paul Nuttall is a truly excellent deputy leader. Douglas Carswell and Mark Reckless, coming from a long-standing parliamentary background.
Took a bit of time to mention with a bit of prompting, Douglas Carswell there.
Oh, well, you haven't got a hypothetical there. Had you not prompted him, he was on my lips.
Okay.
He was,
well,
yes, indeed.
We believe you, Patrick. Yes, go on.
Can I just say that I'm 100% UKIP. I'm 100% behind Nigel Farage. But with or without Nigel Farage, I would still vote for UKIP.
Hear, hear.
And I am sick and tired listening to this politicians telling us that we all need to embrace immigration and how immigration is so good for us. The town I live in...
People are anti-immigration at the moment, generally.
It's almost unrecognisable since the 25 years that I've been living here.
Do you, Patrick, you're nodding there. Do you think our country's unrecognisable? In what way?
I think some communities have faced a massive pace and level of change over the years, and that's undermined community cohesion, absolutely. And that the incomers and the host community haven't had the time and the space to get to know each other, and the pace of change has been far too high, and that what we need in this country is smart immigration, not mass immigration.
Can I also say that my husband and I, we've both worked all our lives, and we've no prospect of our wages increasing. Immigration has most definitely driven our wages down.
Okay, all right, Karen, we get your point. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to Spencer, who's in Ilford. Hello, Spencer.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Hello, not too bad. What would you like to say?
Basically, how does Patrick think the way in which the media is now turned against UKIP, i.e. with the Channel 4 documentary, will affect the up-and-coming campaign? And by the way, Patrick, love the new poster. Got it this morning.
Oh, great. That's great to hear,
We're getting some rigorous questions here, aren't we?
The media and UKIP, well, there's a thorny issue. As someone who was campaign director for the European elections last year, I would say we had at least as much intense anti-UKIP coverage. But actually...
I think it's called scrutiny.
Well, I don't object to scrutiny, and in fact I was going on to say I don't really object to the intense, cartoonish, over-the-top coverage we sometimes get, because in my experience the fair play of the British people kicks in and it actually produces a reaction the other way and can help us. And I notice some of the newspapers who aren't pro-UKIP have probably more got to a position now where they think they just won't mention us, because if they're too hostile, knowing that a portion of their readers support us, it actually perhaps does us more good than harm.
And are we seeing that in the polls at the moment? Because UKIP are taking a little bit of a dive in the polls, down to 10% now.
Well, it depends which poll you pick, doesn't it?
Well, 10 to 12%. They're sort of mostly in that, whereas it was sort of 15 to 18% a couple of months ago.
I think poll of polls is ranging between 13 and 14 at the moment. I think you're right.
Is a trend,
there's been maybe a 1 point on average drop in the days before the start of what's known as the short campaign. We've got lots of plans to make sure that we get our fair share of coverage during the short campaign. We think we've got lots of ideas the British public will like as they hear about them. In previous elections, if we look at a parallel with the Lib Dems, they've tended to dip and then they during the campaign, they tend to build support because of the extra profile. So that may well be a countervailing pressure.
How are your relations with Nigel Farage? I'm hearing gossip, and obviously we don't...
Oh, go on, tell me your gossip.
Well, the gossip is that you and Nigel Farage have fallen out a bit, and that he doesn't like your turnover tax and is going to veto it in the manifesto.
Well, if I say to you that I am now the campaign director for the general election campaign, I've taken up a desk in Brooks Mews, see Nigel every day, speak to him several times a day. Relations
so basically,
are
I need
excellent.
to get better informants. That's what you're saying.
Well, I won't comment on the quality of your informants.
Just on the turnover tax, though, just explain in 30 seconds, if you can, what that means. And because a lot of people think that that's sort of basically a lunatic idea.
Right, well... When I stood up at the party conference last autumn, what I wasn't proposing was a general taxation of companies switching to turnover rather than profit. What I was proposing was a Treasury Commission to design a reserve power that could make sure that those big multinationals can't divert their profits out of Britain and declare them elsewhere, and that there would be an effective floor, so everyone would have to contribute.
And will it be in the manifesto?
It will be one of a range of options about corporate taxation, because what's happened since I made that speech very shortly afterwards, George Osborne finally started taking the issue seriously. He's designed something called a diverted profits tax. Now, the MPs on the Treasury Select Committee have put a red traffic light warning sign beside that saying it's full of doubt and how is this going to work? But I give him some credit for doing that, and we'll see how it works.
Right, let's move on to John in Shingford. Hello, John.
Hello, Ian.
Hello. Go ahead.
Can I just say something about the Australian immigration?
No, I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather you just got to your question, if you don't mind.
Okay, my question's simple. I'm baffled as to why UKIP do not support a referendum on our membership of the European Union. It is not their policy.
John, we do support one.
Excuse me? We've had this conversation on Twitter, Patrick, and you have said very clearly our policy is to win the general election and leave the EU without a referendum. You do not trust the British people to vote on it.
What we would do, if you're talking about us going from 0 MPs at the last election, 2 through by-elections, to actually a majority UKIP government of over 300 MPs all in one go, we would take that as a mandate from the British people to begin the process of withdrawal under Article 50. But at the end of that process, once we listen, John, you've asked the question. You've asked the question, so perhaps it would be an idea to let me answer it. At the end of that process, of course, we would have a referendum on whether the British people wanted to leave, and effectively by then,
it doesn't say that on your website.
Well, I'm telling you what the position is. Of course, we believe in that democracy is paramount. We would give the British people the final decision in a referendum.
But once you've served an Article 50 notice, the decisions on the terms of our leaving the European Union don't involve Britain. They only involve the other members.
No, there's a negotiating process which takes place.
Yes, it is, but the other side is the rest of the EU, not including us. So we don't have the position of negotiating from inside the EU as you would have.
So what's your preferred solution, John?
I'd like to renegotiate the terms of our membership and then see that put to the British people in an in-out referendum. I support David Cameron's position, and according to the polls, so do the majority of the British people.
I think David Cameron's position before he got the UKIP boot on his neck was that he wouldn't have a referendum because it wasn't in the national interest.
We put 2 bills through Parliament to that effect.
He put a 3-line whip on all his MPs not to vote for a referendum, and 81 of them defied him.
That was a backbench amendment, which was all over the place, frankly.
Oh, right. I see. You sound very, very well versed in Cameroon spin, John.
What I'm exercised at is this idea that you will go through the whole process of negotiating. You'll effectively serve notice to quit, and then at the last minute, if the British people say no, we want to stay, what are you going to do?
Well, look, that would be a devastating blow to the whole rationale of having a UKIP government. That would make us inept advocates.
Because it's a general election. In a general election, no party has won a general election with a majority of votes cast for more than 50 years.
Well, look, yes, I understand that.
A general election.
But
your leader this morning was saying
John, I'm
going to an anti-immigration.
I'm going to call you to order because we've only got 10 minutes left, and I want to let Patrick have the final word on this one.
Well, yeah. if the British people at the end of our Article 50 negotiation said, actually, we prefer to stay in, they'd be actually voting for £10 billion net of contributions to the EU rather than more money for defence, rather than more money for the NHS. I think, certainly, if I was in the UKIP government at that stage, I would view my useful life as a politician to have come to a pretty dramatic end.
Patrick, I don't know if you've seen this story today, but according to your candidate in Hackney North and Stoke Newington, who's fighting Diane Abbott, Keith Fraser, is he somebody that you're familiar with?
No, but I'm sure you're about to familiarise me. Well,
he's said that the UK authorities should not be stopping British citizens from joining ISIS. They should be booking chartered flights for them instead.
I think I did hear something about this last night. I mean, it's quite a populist formulation, isn't it? I wouldn't think of any that reinforcing that barbaric organisation was in any sense a rational idea. But I would say that it just baffles me that we have young British citizens in our country who hate our values so much that they want to go and join such a barbarous force. And it's quite fair for people to question to what extent those people deserve to live in our country in the first place.
Well, Mr. Fraser says we don't need to stop them going over. Let them go. We shouldn't be worried about them flying there. Just make sure they get there and they never come back, because this country would be a lot safer without them. Now, if he was a Conservative candidate, Linton Crosby, their campaign director, would be on the phone to him in no uncertain terms. Are you going to give him a little phone call tonight?
Well, from what I hear about Linton Crosby, he might well be on the phone to him in no certain terms saying, well done, the punters are going to love this.
So you think it's perfectly okay what he's said?
No, I think he's not a member of the inner leadership team, is he? But he's expressing frustrations, not, in a particularly sensible formulation as far as policy making goes. But I'm sure a lot of people listening to him will share the absolute fury that we have what Nigel Farage has described as a fifth column within our midst.
Simon's in Brixton. Hi, Simon.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you for taking my call. I was wondering, why is UKIP against any action on climate change, renewable energy and energy independence? And secondly, why does UKIP still want to undo the work of cancer charities and bring smoking back into pubs so young people like me will smell like an old ashtray after a night out?
I remember those days. Patrick,
well, shall I answer them in reverse order so I don't forget? On the bringing smoking back, I think where we can guarantee that there'll be separate rooms, some pubs have a snug and a public bar or whatever, then I think that's a freedom of choice issue. I actually have never smoked in my life, and I agree with you. I remember the days when you'd go to a pub and you the next morning your clothes would stink and it wasn't particularly pleasant. But I do have to observe this, that it's nicer for us and for me to go to a pub now, much nicer, but I don't go that often. And I think a lot of pubs, they're stock
like
in
your
trade.
Leader.
His
clothes would stink, wouldn't they? They'd reek to high heaven.
But, pubs do depend on their regulars, and many of the regulars smoke. Although I do also have to say,
smoking.
A lot of them are stopped. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think a lot of them now actually quite enjoy sneaking off to the smoking shelter outside and mixing with each other a bit before they go in and rejoin all us square types. But shall I get on to...
Sorry, if you go to, sorry to interrupt, but if you go to countries like Austria, they have a smoking section of the nightclub or bar, and it's often bigger than the normal section, and you have to go through it to go to the toilets, and all the smoke leaches through. So I think if you had a smoking area inside a pub, it would result in the same problems as we had before with passive smoking. Cancer charity, we've got all these races for life and all these things to raise money to stop cancer. I mean, to bring smoking back, and it would encourage people to smoke. I've known people that tried to give up when there was no smoking ban, and the lack of a smoking area meant that they had to go outside like a dog into the cold, and they consequently gave up. So I really hope UKIP would change. I mean, I don't necessarily support your party, but it just seems like a ridiculous policy.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to the climate change aspect.
Yes. Well, I note, I'm not a scientist, so I would never come at this issue from the point of view of denying climate change is happening. And most scientists still seem to agree that it is, not perhaps as overwhelming as used to be, but certainly probably it's a 90-10 split. So I tend to agree with the scientists that it's happening. It seems to have slowed down. And I also note the biggest climate killer in Britain is not the heat, but the cold. We have on average about 20,000 what they call excess winter deaths, which is mainly frail elderly people too scared to heat their homes properly. And in the 21st century, that's a complete disgrace. And through the climate levies, we have higher bills for gas and electricity than need be. And Britain is now, sorry, just finish this point and then I'll pause. Britain is responsible, I believe, for less than 2% of global emissions and is now exporting heavy industry out to places with lower environmental standards, which might result actually in a net rise in emissions. And none of that makes any sense to me.
Well, you've got some points. I mean, when it comes to, people being cold at home, I'd say actually to the government not taking any action on properties being let, with single glazing, with damp conditions, with leaking windows, which that's why people's bills have risen. And also, all these villages that seem to support you because you object to wind farms, they've now got fracking. And in Denmark and other countries, they're getting their renewable energy rates up and up and up, and they're well on their way to energy independence.
Simon, I think we can take it that you're probably not going to vote for UKIP at the election. Just a hunch on my part. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go quickly to Michael, who's in Acton. Michael, what's your question?
Hello, Patrick.
Hiya.
I've got to ask you, and my vote would depend on this. Sergeant Alex Blackman, if you get in or have any sort of coalition, would you agree to release him?
Just remind us who he is.
Sergeant Alex Blackman was convicted wrongly of murder for putting a bullet in a mortally wounded Taliban's chest a couple of years ago.
But he was found guilty at a court-martial, wasn't he?
He was given a political sentence, yes.
And you think that should be overturned?
I don't think it should be. I think there's thousands and thousands hundreds of thousands of people on Facebook that have joined the campaign to free him.
Okay. Patrick, quick answer.
UKIP.
Right, I'm not going to give you a categorical yes to that because I haven't looked in detail at all the circumstances. I am overwhelmingly pro our forces and know they've been put in intolerable and incredibly dangerous positions, but we do have independent judicial processes in this country, and I don't think it's for a politician who's not familiar with all the facts to just spout off a position.
Well, Patrick, thank you very much indeed for joining us for our election call. Coming up later in the week on our election call, we'll have prominent Conservative politician tomorrow taking your calls with me from 7, and Nick Clegg will be in with Nick Ferrari on Thursday morning from 9. And don't forget, if you miss anything, you can get all of this and more from LBC's podcast service. You can get full details at lbc.co.uk.
The race is on.
And this is the most unpredictable general election in a generation.
Some are calling it a lottery.
Who's going to win? The simple answer is nobody knows.
Britain decides. Follow the battle for number 10, live on LBC.
Now, coming up after 5, we're going to turn to the subject of immigration. That's what we started talking to Patrick O'Flynn about. It seems to be the second most important policy in this election for most voters. Yet none of the parties seem to have a coherent policy on it. Why do you think that is? And what would in fact be a reasonable policy on immigration? Labour, they let, 600,000 people into the country from Eastern Europe when they said it would be 13,000. The Tories haven't kept to their promise to limit immigration to tens of thousands. Not quite sure what the Liberal Democrat policy is on immigration. And UKIP seem to flip-flop on whether